She's my wife. The words left Caleb Brooks's mouth before his brain had a chance to stop them. He'd never seen this woman before in his life, but she was barefoot, bleeding, wearing a shredded evening gown, and three men in dark suits were closing in on her with the kind of patience that only comes from certainty. Caleb was a single black father, ex-cop, a man who had spent the last 4 years keeping his head down, raising his 9-year-old daughter Maya alone, and staying as far from trouble as a quiet suburb would allow. His daughter was asleep in the back seat. He had every reason to drive away. He didn't. He stepped out of the truck, placed himself between the woman and the men, and said it again. Calm, steady, no hesitation. "She's my wife. Is there a problem?" The men exchanged a look. Then they left. What Caleb didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that the woman trembling beside him wasn't just a victim running from a dangerous husband. She was a secret heiress, the sole heir to a billion-dollar trust. And the men he'd just stared down work for the most powerful man in the city. That one lie didn't just save her life. It pulled Caleb and his daughter into a war he wasn't prepared for. If you've ever done the right thing at the worst possible moment, you already know how this ends. But Caleb didn't. Not yet. If you're new here, this channel is where real stories about real courage live. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. It's going to be worth it. Caleb Brooks was not a man who asked for much. A working furnace in January. A school that called him back when Maya had a fever. Enough hours in the day to make dinner before she fell asleep at the table. That was the life he had built after everything else collapsed. Small, manageable, and deliberately unremarkable. He drove a 7-year-old Tahoe with a crack in the dashboard and a passenger seat permanently adjusted to fit nobody but him. He worked security consulting for a mid-sized firm downtown, the kind of job that let him use what he knew without making him remember why he'd left. He lived in a 3-bedroom house in Garfield Heights, a quiet suburb southeast of Cleveland where people waved from driveways and minded their business. The neighbors knew him as the single dad on the corner, polite, private, the one who shoveled Mrs. Patterson's walkway without being asked and never lingered long enough for conversation. That suited him fine. Maya was 9 years old and already more perceptive than most adults he'd worked with. She had her mother's eyes, dark, patient, watching, and a habit of asking questions that sounded simple until you were 3 sentences into your answer and realized she'd already known what you were going to say. She did ballet on Tuesdays and Thursdays, read library books on weekends, and had recently informed Caleb that she was basically a vegetarian except for bacon, a position she defended with surprising legal precision. She was the one thing in his life that was still whole. Her mother, Diane, had died of a brain aneurysm 3 years earlier. No warning, no illness, no time. One morning she was making coffee and telling Maya to put on her shoes, and by noon, she was gone. Caleb had been on duty when it happened. He made it to the hospital in time to hold her hand, but not in time for her to know he was there. He didn't talk about that. He'd learned that grief without an audience was easier to carry. What he did talk about, when pressed, which was rare, was why he'd left the force. 6 years ago, Caleb had been one of the lead investigators on a homicide case that made the local papers for months. The evidence had been textbook, physical, circumstantial, corroborated by 2 separate witnesses. He'd built the case himself, brick by brick, and believed every word of it. The man convicted, a 34-year-old warehouse worker named Derek Lawson, had maintained his innocence through the entire trial. Caleb had seen that before. Everyone said they didn't do it. Derek Lawson actually hadn't. 4 years into a 15-year sentence, new DNA evidence cleared him completely. The real perpetrator had been someone the original investigation had looked at and dismissed in the first week. The witnesses had been pressured. The physical evidence had been mishandled. And Caleb, who prided himself on reading people, on trusting his gut over paperwork, had never once questioned the narrative he'd built. Derek Lawson walked out of prison having lost his marriage, his relationship with his children, and 4 years of his life. Caleb walked out of the department 6 months later, having lost his certainty in everything he'd been trained to believe about himself. The department cleared him of misconduct. The failures had been systemic, distributed, deniable. That made it worse somehow. Clean hands on the outside, the weight entirely internal. He'd spent the years since trying to be a different kind of man, more careful, less certain. Someone who looked at the person in front of him before deciding what the files said they were. He hadn't put himself in a position to test that until the night Serena Vale ran barefoot across an empty street and changed the direction of everything. He hadn't known her name then. He hadn't known anything about her except that she was running and no one else was stopping. What he would learn later, piece by piece, the way all hard truths arrive, was that Serena Vale Harrington was not simply a woman in danger. She was the secret sole heir to the Vale Trust, a privately held family fortune worth several $1 billion across real estate holdings, international investment accounts, and controlling shares in a portfolio of companies most people had never heard of. Her husband, Victor Harrington, had known exactly what he was marrying. The love had never been the point. But that was later. That night, Caleb only knew one thing. His daughter was asleep in the back seat, and a woman needed help, and he was the only one there. It was a Thursday night in late October, 20 minutes past 9. Caleb had picked Maya up from dance practice at 8:30, stopped at a gas station for her chocolate milk, the one non-negotiable of Thursday evenings, and was 3 blocks from home when he saw the SUV. It was parked at an angle on Meridian Street, hazard lights off, engine running. A black Escalade with tinted windows and no front plate. Caleb clocked it the way he clocked everything, automatically without deciding to. Wrong neighborhood for that car, wrong hour for that parking job. He filed it and kept driving. Then the back door of the Escalade opened and she came out running. Not stumbling, not easing herself out slowly the way people do when they've had too much to drink. Running. Full stride, arms moving, bare feet hitting the asphalt with the desperation of someone who had calculated the exact right moment and taken it. The evening gown she wore was dark blue, expensive once, now torn at the left shoulder and the hem. She didn't look back, she just ran. Caleb stopped the truck. Behind her, 3 men stepped out of the Escalade. That was what confirmed it for him, not the woman, but the men. The way they moved. No urgency, no raised voices, no performance of concern. Just 3 men walking in a loose formation with the measured pace of professionals who had done this before and understood that running only extended the timeline. One of them was already scanning the street, checking sight lines, noting who was around, assessing obstacles. That wasn't a husband chasing a wife. That was a team executing a retrieval. Maya stirred in the back seat. "Daddy, are we home?" "Not yet, baby. Close your eyes." She settled back without question. She trusted him that completely, and the weight of that trust sat on his chest every day. Caleb's phone was in the cup holder. He could call 911. That was the correct response. Call it in, stay in the vehicle, let the system handle it. He knew the protocol. He'd written versions of it himself. And he also knew, with the practiced clarity of someone who had watched the system handle things, exactly how that played out for a woman being dragged back to an Escalade by the time a dispatcher finished asking him to confirm his location. He thought about Derek Lawson. Not the case file, not the evidence. Derek Lawson, the man. 34 years old, standing in a courtroom saying, "I didn't do this," while Caleb sat 3 rows back, convinced he was looking at a liar. The specific texture of that certainty, how solid it had felt, how completely wrong it had been. He didn't know this woman. He didn't know what she'd done or who those men were, or what the full story looked like from the other side. He knew what he could see, a person running and 3 people following, and nobody else on this street willing to be the fixed point. He got out of the truck. She saw him the moment he stepped onto the curb, changed direction without breaking stride, cutting across the street toward him with the precision of someone who had already mapped every exit and decided he was the best option remaining. Up close, she was mid-30s, cheekbones sharp, eyes dark and alert. Frightened, yes, but the fear was organized. She was thinking through it, not drowning in it. She reached him, her hand closed around his forearm. The three men were 15 feet away and closing. Caleb didn't deliberate. He turned to face the men, positioned himself slightly in front of her, and spoke in the level tone he'd used 10,000 times on doorsteps and crime scenes when he needed a situation to stop moving. "She's my wife. Is there a problem?" The men stopped. The one in front, older, gray at the temples, a scar along his jaw, studied Caleb for a long moment, weighing him, calculating. Then his eyes moved to the woman behind Caleb, and something shifted in his expression. Not retreat, postponement. "You should think carefully about what you're doing," the man said. "I'm standing with my wife," Caleb said. "That's all I'm doing." Another pause. Then the man stepped back, said something quiet to the others, and all three returned to the Escalade. It pulled away without speed, without drama, disappearing around the corner as if none of it had happened. The woman's grip on his arm didn't loosen. "They'll be back," she said. Her voice was steadier than it had any right to be. "Not tonight, but they'll be back." Caleb looked down at her. "Who are you?" She met his eyes. "Someone you just made very dangerous to know." He glanced back at the truck. Maya's silhouette was still in the rear window, head tilted against the glass, asleep. "Come on," he said. "Get in." He gave her the guest room and a pair of Diane's old sweatpants that had been sitting in a box in the closet for 3 years. He didn't explain where they came from. She didn't ask. Maya had woken up just enough to register a stranger in the hallway, blinked at her father with sleepy suspicion, and accepted his explanation. A friend who needed a place to stay, with the provisional trust of a child who knew when adults were simplifying things and had decided to allow it for now. She was asleep again within minutes. Caleb sat at the kitchen table and waited. Serena came downstairs 20 minutes later. The torn gown was gone. She'd washed her face and pulled her hair back, and she looked, in the overhead light of his ordinary kitchen, less like a woman who had been running for her life and more like a woman who was accustomed to composing herself quickly and thoroughly. She sat across from him without being invited, folded her hands on the table. "I need you to know something before I tell you anything," she said. "Whatever I say in this kitchen, you can't unknow it. So if you want to stay out of this, I need to leave before I say another word." Caleb looked at her. "You said they'd be back." "Yes." "Then you leaving doesn't keep me out of it. They already have my face." She held his gaze for a moment, then gave a single nod. "Fair." Her name was Serena Vale Harrington. Her husband was Victor Harrington, a name Caleb recognized without effort, the way anyone in Northeast Ohio would. Victor Harrington had his name on 2 hospital wings, a university scholarship fund, and a proposed waterfront development that had been on the front page of the Plain Dealer for the better part of a year. He appeared at charity galas. He was photographed with senators. He had the particular kind of public profile that functions as armor, so much visible goodness that the idea of looking beneath it felt almost impolite. The reality, Serena explained, was that Victor Harrington had married her 11 years ago with a specific purpose. She was the sole heir to the Vale Trust, a private family fortune assembled over 3 generations, held across real estate, international accounts, and controlling stakes in a network of companies. Her father, who had built the trust, had been meticulous about one thing. Its control would pass only to Serena, and only when she chose to claim it. He had designed it that way deliberately, having spent his life watching what happened to wealth when it moved through the wrong hands. Victor had understood the structure of the trust before the first date. Over 11 years, he had worked methodically, forged her signature on documents that redirected financial authority, cultivated relationships with her doctors, and gradually introduced, through those doctors, a paper trail suggesting Serena suffered from a psychological condition that impaired her judgment. Had her declared in 2 separate private legal filings as someone whose capacity for financial self-determination was under review. None of it had gone public yet. All of it was designed to reach a single endpoint: a court declaration that Serena Vale Harrington lacked the legal competence to control her own inheritance, at which point Victor, as her husband and designated guardian, would assume full control of the Vale Trust. She had discovered the first forged document 14 months ago. She had spent the time since then building a case, quietly, carefully, without telling anyone who might report back to Victor. Last night, he'd found out she knew. Caleb listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You need to go to the police," he said. "The attorney who filed the competency paperwork is a former deputy DA with active relationships in this department," she said. "I need a federal route or a completely independent legal channel. Both take time I may not have now that Victor knows I'm gone." Caleb rubbed the back of his neck and looked at the ceiling. He was a security consultant with a 9-year-old daughter and a guest room. He was not the independent legal channel she was describing. But through the kitchen window he could see the street. A car he didn't recognize had been parked at the far end of the block for the last 40 minutes without moving. They already knew where he lived. He looked back at Serena. "Okay," he said. "You stay. We figure this out. But I need to know everything. Every document, every name, every account. No gaps." She looked at him steadily. "You sure?" He thought about Derek Lawson. He thought about Maya upstairs. He thought about the way he'd spent 4 years making himself smaller so that nothing could reach him again. "No," he said honestly, "but I'm sure about the car parked outside, so let's start there." By the 4th day, the street felt different. Caleb noticed it the way he noticed everything. Not all at once, but in accumulation. A silver sedan he didn't recognize parked 2 houses down on Monday morning, gone by noon, back again by 3. A man in a gray jacket who walked past the house twice in 40 minutes without looking at it directly, which was its own kind of looking. A phone call to his neighbor Frank Patterson, casual and friendly, asking whether Caleb had a new lady staying over. Frank hadn't thought anything of it, just mentioned it over the fence. Frank never called about things like that. They were building a picture. Caleb knew the technique because he had used it himself. At Maya's school, a man Caleb didn't recognize had stopped near the pickup line and asked one of the other parents whether the Brooks girl's father was back with someone new. The parent had mentioned it to Maya's teacher. The teacher had mentioned it to Caleb at pickup, uncertain whether it was worth raising. It was worth raising. Caleb thanked her, kept his voice neutral, and spent the drive home explaining to Maya why she should tell him immediately if any adult she didn't know asked her questions about their family. Maya had looked at him in the rearview mirror. "Is this about the lady staying with us?" "Partly." "Is she in trouble?" "We're working on it." Maya had considered this. "Okay, but she helped me with my math worksheet and she got all of them right, so I think she's probably smart enough to figure it out." Caleb had almost smiled. Almost. The media angle came next. A local news blog published a 3-paragraph piece speculating that a disgraced former CPD investigator was reportedly harboring a wealthy woman who had gone missing from her husband's household. No names yet. But the sourcing was clearly deliberate. Someone had fed that story with enough specific detail to make it credible and enough vagueness to make it unactionable. Victor wasn't just applying pressure, he was constructing a narrative. Inside the house, the situation had its own complications. Maya had decided, with the swift and total certainty of a 9-year-old, that she liked Serena. Serena had fixed a loose cabinet hinge on the second morning without being asked. She'd sat with Maya through a 40-minute homework session on fractions without once making the girl feel slow. She remembered, without being told twice, that Maya took her orange juice with minimal ice, and that the strawberry jam went on before the peanut butter, not after, because the order mattered. The house that had operated for 3 years on the quiet efficiency of 2 people who knew each other completely was beginning to feel, in small and specific ways, like something else. Caleb caught himself noticing it and made himself stop noticing it, which was its own kind of noticing. It was on the 5th evening that he made the call he'd been putting off. Marissa Cole had been a public defender when Caleb was still on the force. Sharp, relentless, and constitutionally incapable of letting a bad argument stand unchallenged. They'd been on opposite sides of two cases and the same side of one. She was the only person from that chapter of his life who had called him after Derek Lawson, not to manage the situation, but simply to say she didn't think he was a bad man. He'd never forgotten that. He called her now. He gave her enough, the broad structure of what Serena had told him, the forged documents, the competency filings, the legal channel Victor had already compromised. He didn't give her names yet,